In this lesson, we'll discuss how to make the required changes to BIOS to boot from a CD, DVD, or USB drive. While some systems may be set to check for bootable CD, DVDs, or USBs on boot up, many aren't. If you had your CD, DVD, or USB device plugged in, but your system booted as normal, ignoring the image you created, you'll have to make changes to your BIOS to proceed. BIOS stands for Basic Input-Output System. It's a set of configuration files that are read to boot your computer. It tells the computer how to do things like find and load hard drives, load system devices, and where to check for the bootable operating system. The specific steps you'll take, what key to press to enter your BIOS settings, for example, and the way you'll navigate your BIOS's menu to get to the settings will vary with manufacturer and motherboard maker. The basic idea of finding the boot order and modifying it to have your new image recognized, though, carries across all systems. I'm doing this procedure on a Dell laptop, as you'll see from the boot screen. I hit F12 to enter BIOS during boot. If you miss it, it can go by pretty fast. Just shut down and try again. After hitting F12, I'm taken to a screen where I could, if I chose to, just select a one-time option to boot from a CD or DVD. This option may not be available on your system and doesn't show you how to boot to USB, so I'm going to scroll down to BIOS Setup and enter the more advanced settings available there. You'll see that I have an OK-looking graphical user interface for my BIOS, but that may not be the case for you. You may have to navigate a text-based menu with arrow keys and select with a spacebar. After clicking on BIOS Setup, I'm taken to the BIOS Setup screen. I apologize for the resolution. I'm capturing this on my actual laptop screen with a video camera. Under General, I use the arrow keys to get down to the boot sequence menu item. I can add a checkmark to USB or CD, DVD there. Be sure you leave internal HDD checked along with whichever other item you want selected. If you uncheck internal hard drive, your system will always want to boot to USB or CD, DVD, and will not try to boot from your hard drive. Here I click on CD, DVD and apply and then exit. My changes will be saved and the system will reboot, booting to the media I specified. You can see the system boots to the DVD image I burned earlier, and from there the installation process is the same as it was on VirtualBox. The process for booting to USB is the same, except you would check USB instead of CD, DVD. That's it. Let's start working with Ubuntu. If you recall from the installation process, when we got to this step about partitioning disks, we accepted all the defaults. We selected Guided and used the entire disk to set up LVM, which is Logical Volume Manager. We could have come down and selected Manual, and in this lesson we're going to go over some times when you may want to do that. With the guided partition scheme provided by the installer, the entire hard disk is used, and it's all put into one partition, the root partition. With a large shared partition scheme like that, any activity in one directory can take up the whole hard disk if it goes crazy and just starts using up space. var log on a web server, for example, if you don't have your rotation scheme set up right, it could grow quickly and take up your whole hard drive if something goes wrong. Once all the drive space is taken, your system is very likely going to crash, and it will not crash well. You could lose data. Your system could become unbootable without some steps on your part. What we can do to protect our server is mount high-risk partitions on their own volumes. We'll explore a few of the server types and how we may mount them. We'll explore a few server types and some high-risk directories and how to take care of them in this lesson. You can see your partition scheme with many tools, but the one I think illustrates most clearly for this lesson is Part-Ed. If you type sudo part-ed -l, you get an overview of how your hard drive is partitioned. On this hard drive, which was installed with the default settings, we have a primary boot partition. File system is ext2. It's pretty small. Then we have an extended partition for the rest of the drive, and that is controlled by Logical Volume Manager, so you can change that manually later if you want. When you're manually deciding how to partition your drive, there are some partitions you'll want to keep above a certain minimum. It's recommended to keep your root file system above 20 gigabytes. Your boot partition should be about 250 megabytes. The var partition, 4 gigabytes. Home, 200 gigabytes. And the swap should be twice the size of RAM. Bear in mind though, if you're not going to be using this for very many remote users, home could certainly be much smaller if you're not going to have people logging in and creating stuff on your server. Some of the types of servers you may want to protect with separate partitions are web servers, file servers, and shared access servers. We'll cover each below. On a web server, some directories are used more heavily than on other servers. The var www is where your web server is hosted by default, and var log is used for logging. You may have a separate subdirectory in there, such as Apache or Nginx, but they'll be in var log. var www is pretty static and shouldn't be a cause for concern, but var log can grow quickly as web traffic increases, or if someone's attempting to hack your server. Properly setting up log rotation should prevent your var log directory from taking up all your disk space, but if you have a mistake in your configuration, you can provide further protection by having var log on a separate partition. How big you make that depends very much on how much traffic you expect to receive and how much drive space you have available. But if you have it mounted on a separate partition and it fills up, your web server may crash, but you'll still be able to get in to troubleshoot on the operating system and rescue your server. It also won't crash your server in a bad way, potentially losing data. Another example is a file server. File servers centrally store files so they can be shared with others, or just so you can have all your data in one repository. Where you mount your data store and how much space you give it really depend on how much you have available and your preferences. I would call the mount point something that makes sense though, maybe data. User data, users, whatever makes sense for you. Documents. Another example is a shared access server. Let's say you work at a university and you have many students who will access your server every quarter to do Linux courses. You want to make sure that your home directory is mounted separately and that you set up disk quotas for your students so no one student can take up too much space. There are also some security recommendations in the Center for Internet Security's Ubuntu Linux Benchmark Guide. It's available for free, and I put a link to it in your downloadable materials for this lesson. The CIS benchmark recommends having separate mount points for the temp directory, var, var log audit, and the home directory. It also recommends setting certain options like no set UID or no suid, no dev, and no exec on some of those partitions. please see the CIS benchmark for your operating system for detailed information on that. We've only covered a few of the possibilities here. How you'll want to configure your mount points and partitions depends on your server, so gain some understanding of what type of server you want to install and some directories you may want to protect and how you might protect your operating system by reading ahead or just by doing it and learning as you go along. You could modify your partition scheme at any time using Logical Volume Manager, as I recommended during the installation, and as I always recommend. So that's it for our quick look at partitioning. Great work! So far so good, but how do you power down or reboot from the command line? As with many things in Linux, there are several options including halt, shutdown, and with the system control commands. My preference is the shutdown command. To shut down and power off now, you type sudo shutdown -h now. You have to specify what you want it to do once the system is shut down. -h will power it down, and when you want it to do it. So we say now. So I'll shut down and then we'll start it back up. So we lost our connection and the system is shut down. So that was pretty quick. To power it back on, we double click it in VirtualBox, or you'd hit the power button on a physical server. So that's how you shut down. Shut down -h now, and you have to use it with sudo. To shut down at a time in the future, use the plus sign immediately followed by the number of minutes option. So it would be sudo shutdown -h plus 10 to shut down in 10 minutes. And since Linux is a multi-user operating system, you can send a message to other logged-in users letting them know when the server will shut down so they can save their work. So it'd be sudo shutdown -h plus 10 and then your message, and the message should be in quotes if there are spaces in the message. So with this, sudo shutdown -h plus 10 shutting down in 10 minutes, users will receive a message saying that the server will be shutting down 10 minutes so they can save their work and exit. And it says shutdown is scheduled and then the time in 10 minutes. And we can use the -c option to cancel a scheduled shutdown. So if you want to just reboot, you can do sudo shutdown -r now. And we'll give it a moment to reboot and then we'll reconnect. And you should shut down the system anytime you want to power down. So don't just hit the power button, whether it's a virtual machine or whether it's physical. Shutting down gives the system time to clean up and save files to disk or do whatever it needs to do to shut down cleanly and smoothly. If you just hit the power button, when you power back on, your system could be in an unstable state, and you could also be missing some data. If any files were open at the time you shut down with the power button, you could have corrupted those. And we're back up. So that's how you shut down or reboot. You could also specify a delay time instead of saying now if you don't want to shut down right away. So good job, and I'll see you in the next lesson.